In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the concepts of pub/sub. Now, pub/sub is a messaging architecture. And so the idea is, and in fact, let me grab a whiteboard for this. What you have is you're going to have the concept of a topic, and then you're going to have the concept of a subscriber. And the idea is, so we create a topic, so we'll call this our demo topic. And you submit messages. So you publish a message to the topic. And then if you have one or more subscribers, so we'll call this sub 1, and maybe sub 2, and sub 3. And when a message comes in, it's going to be put in and delivered to each subscriber. So the job of pub/sub is you publish to a topic, and then each of the subscribers now have it. Now, you can have a couple types of ways to read this. So over here, you might have an app, and maybe your app has a little loop in it, and your app has a loop that one checks sub 1 for a message, 2 processes the message, and then 3 gets process the message. It does what's called act the message, and 4 loop back to 1. And so it's going to be basically, it goes in here and it goes up and it pulls messages. Okay. Now you can also have one that when it gets a message, it might push the message to a URL. So maybe you have, web, something like apis.my company.com/app1message. And so we push that message over to here. So we have push. And you can have a combination of as many subscribers as you want. So the idea is another application comes along and it needs a copy of the message. So, what would be a reasonable thing? So let's say you have a new employee getting added to your system. So let's say we're building an HR system. So maybe we have a new employee topic. So the HR system has a new, they add an employee. Well, that new employee, that system, it's got to go up here and it's got to pull a message, and maybe this is the ID system. And so they turn on their ID system and it goes and it reads the subscription and builds IDs for those people. Maybe this is your email system. And so the new employee comes in and we used, it triggers email creation, email box creation. And then maybe pub 3, maybe this is the company website and it's updates, and this updates a database that updates welcome new employees. All 3 of those systems are completely different from each other. One does an ID system. It actually triggers them to do a background check, do who knows what. Well, I guess if they've already added to the system, maybe they already went through the background, or maybe it's to print their ID badge. Maybe the email system builds them an email in their system, in your email system, and maybe subscription 3 just adds to an announcement. They're all totally different things. But you don't want to have the HR system have to talk to all of those systems. So for the last 20 years, we've really seen this sort of architecture evolve. Now, pub/sub is Google's answer to this type system, pub/sub. But, there are a lot of other systems that have done this over the years, and we might use to replace, say, Kafka, RabbitMQ, Microsoft MSMQ, Microsoft Message Queues, IBM Message Queues. There's just tons and tons of systems out there that do something like this. The cool thing about Google is you got this one to many relationship, and there's both push and pull subscriptions. And so some of the limitations of some of your other systems you might have used is sometimes they just did one or the other, but they didn't do both. And it's global, so it's distributed around, so the message entry points are around the globe. Okay, so let's dive in and let's build this in our project here. So I'm going to pop into my project. I'm going to head on over to PubSub. Okay, well, helps if I spell PubSub, but Google will still figure it out because you always figure it out. Okay, ooh, looks like we've already got a couple PubSub topics, not because I built them, but they look like they have to do with container analysis. So remember, if you watch the video on Cloud Run, I enabled container analysis, which automatically scanned my containers. And the way they triggered that was said, when a new container is pushed to artifact registry, send a PubSub message. And then the PubSub message that receives that new to go run an artifact scan. That's okay. We're going to create a new one here. So we're going to call this our demo topic. And I'm not even going to add a new subscription. I'm just going to create a demo topic. Okay, so PubSub has one goal. Its goal is to deliver to all subscribers. Okay. One thing about Google Cloud you'll find is Google Cloud is a bunch of building blocks. PubSub is not this super complex application with its own processing power and all this sort of stuff. PubSub you often use to trigger something like a Cloud Function or Cloud Run, rather than trying to embed the code. So you have this series of events of things that happen. Just like when we looked at Cloud Run, we went from Git repository to Cloud Build over to Artifact Registry. Artifact Registry sent a PubSub message, which triggered the analysis scan, which came back with the results. Plus, it then rolled a new version of our application into Cloud Run. It did all those different things, but that was a lot of different products all put together rather than one big complex product. And PubSub is one of these building blocks that's really the essential to operating the cloud if you're working in a streaming type architecture where you're getting messages coming in asynchronously. They could arrive at any time and you want to process them as quickly as possible. Okay, so I've got this topic, demo topic. I can actually go over here to my demo topic. I can publish a message in here, and I'm going to say test message number 1, and I'm going to publish that. And boom, I just published the message. And PubSub's job is to deliver to all subscribers, and when they've completed delivery and received confirmation they delivered to all subscribers, the message can now be removed from PubSub because its job is done. It's a transportation mechanism. Just like your network transfers packets from clients to web servers and web servers back to clients, it doesn't remember all the packets unless you specifically turn on packet capturing. Well, PubSub's job is any message delivered to the topic will be delivered to each of the subscribers. And once the subscribers have received that message, then the topic can go away, or the message can go away. Well, in this case, I don't have any subscribers. So our message came in, the message was sent to all subscribers, which was none, and then the message was removed. In fact, it says here, messages published to this topic will be lost because we need to create a subscription. So let's create, we'll call it our demo topic sub 1. We're going to make a subscription. And this is going to be a pull subscription. Now, messages will live in the queue. So think of a pull subscription. It's like a queue of messages. Okay, so any message that's put in that subscription until somebody comes along and reads that message, it's going to sit there. But if I don't read it for 7 days, then it can delete it. So if you haven't processed that message in 7 days, something's wrong with your other system. You probably should have detected it by now. All right, we're going to just set this up here for our first run. And we've got this topic now called demo topic. And we now got the subscription 1. So let's go back to our topic. Here's our demo topic. We see there's subscription here. So I'm going to publish a message. And I'm going to publish that message. I'm going to say test message number 2. And I'm going to publish that. And I'm going to publish another one, test message number 3. And I'm going to publish one more. And I'm going to say test message number 4. Now remember, we started with 1, but we sent 1 before we had a subscription. So 1's gone, but 2, 3, and 4 should be around. So now over here, we're going to go and we are going to go to our subscription and we're going to pull the message. Okay, so I could do a pull. And what are we going to see? Look at that. We have message 2, 3, and 4. And we have those messages there. Okay, so the idea of PubSub is we post messages to it, and then the messages we process with whatever code we need. Now, back here on the published message, I could have said, testing number 5, and I could put more data. I could put, what format. Maybe I might put a JSON payload in there, or maybe I'm going to do some XML, or maybe I'm just going to do key value pairs. Whatever I want to put in there. But they also do facilitate that I could put in message attributes down here, and I could say, well, let's think of our HR first name, Grant. Last name, and I'm Moyle. So, and maybe my employee ID, and I'm going to be 007. There we go. So I just published that message. That had some structured data with it. But the idea is we send the messages to the topic, and now we can retrieve them. Okay, so let's, though, go do this from a command line. So I'm going to pop out to command line, and I'm going to make sure I have a couple things here. I've got the Google Cloud SDK loaded on my computer. So if I was to go to Control Panel here and look to see what software I have loaded on my computer, I have installed here, amongst other things, I've got the Google Cloud SDK. Looks like I last installed it in December of 2024. And so that gives me the Google command line. Now I'm going to run a gcloud config, and I'm going to set my project to be the GC demo env. Okay, I got a little application default credential thing. That's fine. I'm not using any ADC. I'm going to do gcloud auth list, though, and just double check who my user is. Yep, I'm logged in as Grant. So I'm going to do a gcloud pub/sub, and I'm going to say topics list. Now, don't worry, on the exam, you're not going to be required to memorize commands. You should be familiar what gcloud does, and you can kind of look at the syntax of it and see, but they're not going to give you like 4 different gcloud commands and say which one's correct for doing it. But the more you start to use Google Cloud, you're going to get more familiar with that. So I've got topics list. I'm going to say describe, and we're going to ask for the describe the demo topic. Let's see what it does. Give me details about their demo topic. Okay, that's the name. Great. Okay, so now let's look at subscriptions list. And I've got my subscription. There we go. That one's a little better. That's telling me about my subscription, about my demo topic. Or sorry, demo topic sub 1. So we're going to say describe demo topic. Describe usually gives you more details. It looks like it gives the same on from this particular API. Okay, so there's my topic. So let's look at gcloud pub/sub and see what the other options are. So there's schemas, snapshots, subscriptions, and topics. Topics in here has create and delete. So I could have created my topic, deleted my topic. I could have added up permissions. So because maybe I want an application that's allowed to publish to pub/sub. So maybe I want to go a cloud function or cloud run that can write to pub/sub. So I need to give that function permissions. I could get the permissions. I could list. I could update. I could do all this sort of stuff. Well, that's kind of cool. So, publish. Publish. That sounds good. Let's look at publish. Publish says, okay, I want to publish what topic? We're going to publish to the topic called demo topic. And it wants message, and we're going to say test message number 9. And let's see what happens. There we go. We just did a message. Okay, so we can publish to a message with the command line. We could also probably go into our VS Code or somewhere else. I use VS Code with Gemini, and I could probably tell it, hey, give me the Python code to write to pub/sub, to a pub/sub topic called demo topic. And we'll have it generate me and similar sort of things. What do we need? We need a publisher. We need a pub sub publisher topic. We need the topic path. Needs to be what's project it's in and what's the name of our topic. What's the format of our data? So we're encoding our message in a format it's expecting UTF-8. And then we are publishing a message and that message. So that code right there, apart from needing to install PubSub version 1, we could actually fire off a message. Well, that's kind of cool. In fact, we could add something like that code back to our Cloud Run from earlier. I'd add the pip install of probably Google Cloud. I don't know, we should ask Gemini. Gemini, what do you say? What do I need to pip install? And it's probably going to tell me pip install Google Cloud Storage, Secret Manager, and now they're telling me Google Cloud PubSub. Yep. So I need Google Cloud PubSub loaded to use that. And then apart from that, I could just fire off a message into PubSub. It's kind of cool. Okay, so I'm going to stick with the GUI and the command line, but you need to realize everything you can do from the web UI, you could probably do from a G-Cloud command, and you can almost definitely do from a library for Python or Java or Node or one of those within your code. Okay, so now let's talk about subscriptions. So we got this subscription. Now I'm not going to use this pull here because what I want to do is I'm going to do a G-Cloud PubSub subscriptions, and there is an option here to pull. So we are going to pull from our subscription, and our subscription is called Demo Topic Sub 1. Okay, because we're in the project. We don't need to. We could list a fully qualified for that, say project, GCD demo environment subscription, demo topic sub 1. But this should just let us pull the message. Now, this is the simplest command. So this is going to give us one message. So we got one message from PubSub, test message number 2. Let's run it again. We're going to get test message number 3. We'll do it again. We'll get test message number 4. Now, I'll do it one more time. 5, maybe. There's 5 with our extra data. Now we probably get our 2. Why did 2 come up again? Well, here's the thing about PubSub. I want you to think about your program. Okay, let's go back to our whiteboard. So your program checks sub 1 for message. So it pulls the message. It processes the message. And then it's supposed to go back and say, I'm done with that message. And then it loops around and gets the next one. But what would happen if you crashed in the middle of processing a message? You didn't finish the message. So PubSub by default operates on an acknowledgement basis. So what you have to do is you pull a message and then you have to go back and acknowledge it. In fact, that's what you're seeing here. This big ugly string here is the acknowledgement value for telling it you processed that message. I'll make it a little easier to read here. So I'm going to go pull. Oh, let's pull our demo topic. And we got that message. So we actually have to go back with that within our code, and we do a G-Cloud PubSub subscription, and there is an ACK option. There's ACK. And ACK says G-Cloud PubSub subscription ACK. What's the subscription? So demo topic sub 1, and then the ACK IDs, which could be an array, but I can just put in the single one. And I've now acknowledged that message. And so now that message won't come back again. So I think I just acknowledged message 2. So message 2 won't come back. Now, I'm going to go back and pull demo topic, but I'm going to say limit 10. And it's going to give me up to 10 messages. See, so I got message 9, 3, 4. Let's acknowledge message 4. So I'm going to copy that, and we're going to go, and I'm going to go back here with my ACK IDs, and I'm going to acknowledge message 4 processed. Okay, so we processed that. We've ACKed the message with the following IDs, and we could, as I said, we could have provided an array. Okay, so let's try our pull of limit 10 again. Let's see what happens. There's the messages. 4 did not come. Oh, maybe it did. Oh, look at that. It's still there. Well, we're going to explain that here in just a minute, what's happening. I'm going to pull again, and I'm going to pull one more time. I'm going to pull quickly here. And we might get no messages. Now, there's basically a cooldown period. And by default, it's 10 seconds. And that's easy for a program to handle. But I'm not fast enough to do that. And so I'm going to create a second subscription here so we can play with this a little bit better. So I'm going to create another subscription, and I'm going to call this sub 2. I'm just going to call it sub 2, and it'll actually we'll keep demo topic sub 2. And that's going to be a pull subscription. It's going to hold on to the messages for up to 7 days or they're acknowledged. And down here, there's a default of 10 seconds. I'm going to make it 60 seconds. So that'll give me a little bit more time to acknowledge the message. Now, when I first go out here and I go and let's pull sub 2, and I'm just going to pull one message. There won't be any because we created this subscription after those messages are already in the queue. So there aren't any right now. I'll come back and say, no messages, Grant, because there's nothing in the queue for you. That's okay. Come on. Nope, no items. Okay, so let's go push something to the topic. So I'm going to publish, and I'm going to call this message 100. So there's message 100. So now I'm going to pull sub 2, and sub 2 should be able to see that message. There's a message. I'm going to run it again, and now that message won't be pulled for 60 seconds. So the idea is my program reads the message and is beginning to process it. Now, what if I had several machines that were all pulling the same topic? So let's talk about this one. So I've got my topic. We got sub 1, and we've also got sub 2. But sub 2, let's say we're using a VM. We're using a VM number 1, VM number 2, and VM number 3. And they all run the same code. They run the same code. 1, pull a message. 2, process the message. 3, ACK the message. And 4, go to 1. Old school. Anybody from the 90s, 80s? We used to write little 10, print hello, 20, go to 10. Just an endless loop. But so that's running on VM number 1, and that's running on VM number 2, and that's running on VM number 3, and we've got message 100, 101, 102, 103, and 104. Well, maybe this one processes 100, this one gets 101, this one gets 102, this one gets 103, this one gets 104, but it crashes. Crash before finishing 104. Do we lose data? No, the big thing about pub sub is we don't lose data because it never acknowledged that it processed 104. So what happens? 104 after 60 seconds gets delivered again. So I've now talked for 60 seconds. So I pull and test message 100 is back. If I pull again, it's now in that 60-second cooldown period and it won't be delivered for 60 seconds. So now I got time to go acknowledge that. So I'm going to copy that. And so once it comes back, it says there's no items for that one. And what I can do is I will go ahead and I'll acknowledge it. So I'm going to ACK demo topic sub 2 ack IDs equals, and I'm going to paste that in there. And now I just act it. So now what happens is even though I pull, it should be taken out. Now the reason it didn't disappear earlier is the default was 10 seconds and I didn't take it out of the queue in time, so it started to redeliver. But in this case, this one's working great. Now, it's going to be 0, even though I might talk for 5 or 10 minutes. But let's go ahead and get a couple more messages in the queue. So let's go ahead and we'll put in 101, 102, 103, 104, and 105, and 106. Here we go. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull the message. Now, there's a couple other things that you have to understand about PubSub. PubSub does not guarantee it's going to give you the messages in order. Now, in this case, because they're all going in from the same place, they're all going to probably come out in order for me. So if I just kind of cycle through here, I'll get 103, 104. But I want you to imagine a scenario. So I'm going to grab a fresh whiteboard here. I want you to imagine, so let's say we got airplanes. So let's say our compute is in US Central 1. And its job is it's getting PubSub messages. And maybe it's writing them into BigQuery or doing its processing and writing to BigQuery. Now, let's say that our data is coming from airplanes. And we've got an airplane going from Seattle to Chicago. We've also got an airplane that's going from Delhi to Chennai. And so there is the PubSub endpoint, API endpoint in Delhi. There is the PubSub, so that would be Asia South 2. And over here, we got Seattle, Chicago, and so that's hitting the PubSub in US Central 1. And at exactly 347.250, and this one at 347.200, okay? This one submits a message about an aircraft. And the aircraft, so it's getting airplane data, airplane, and it's got its location, so the latitude, longitude, its speed, its heading, its fuel, and some other data points. And so at 347 and 200.2 seconds, a message goes in about a plane that's going Delhi to Chennai. And here at 347.250, a Seattle to Chicago drops a message in. Which one gets here first? Even though this one happened, this happened 0.05 seconds later, it might arrive earlier than the Delhi message. So you have the possibility of out of order messages. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Well, at a large scale, think about an email system that, or a message system that each action is not dependent on the previous actions. This isn't a problem. And to Google, this isn't usually a problem. But if you work for a bank and you are trying to basically balance and you need everything to be action 1 can't, or action 2 can't be processed until the one previous is processed, then you need message ordering. Now, you can ask for message ordering, but it slows the system down. Why does it have to slow the system down? Well, there's about a 200 millisecond latency from Delhi to US Central, whereas this API was caught there. So we would have to basically delay the message processing to account for any latencies in the system of the global travel, or the time it takes to get it from all the different endpoints. Remember, you got all these different regions plus all the edges that Google has where they're bringing in those messages. So if you want to process them as fast as possible and you don't care about order, you process the message as soon as it comes along, and you could, if it's just going into BigQuery, you could save the entry point time, so the time it entered pub sub, and you could then order it in your reporting or things like that. But if you're needing to process the messages in the order they arrive, well, back in pub sub, when we create a subscription, there are items. So like we could have sub 3 ordered. We could say we want to pull, we want to retain for 7 days, we want acknowledgement of 10 seconds, but down here there is order messages with an ordering key. When enabled, messages tagged with the same ordering key were received in the order that they are published. This option could not be changed. May increase publish to subscriber latency and decrease publish availability. Because basically Google has to put them all into a single system, whereas a distributed system can process them wherever. And so this is one of the dilemmas that we face. And those of you who maybe have worked on something like, say, Kafka, well, your Kafka or your Rabbit, all messages were received here. All messages received at a single point. In Google, in pub sub, the messages are received at the endpoint. So this is US, and we'll keep it simple, just say US Central. We could have Europe West 1. We could have Asia South 1. And so messages could come into any of these points. And then basically the way you kind of have to think of it, then they're put in to something like a spanner database. But there are latencies. So you're inserting the messages into here, and then pub sub, and then when your subscription, so when you pull, you're pulling out of here. And so if you have latencies, because maybe this is your spanner DB and you're pulling messages in US Central 1, the latencies are going to be minimal. This will be the fastest. This is going to be slower, and this is going to be the slowest. Plus we have spanner latencies of the replication, all that, because it takes time to transmit data on a network. And so if you need ordering, Google has to basically slow down what you can pull from to make sure, or have Spanner say, hey, we need the exact order, so you need to make sure you're pulling them. Now, we would have used to use Bigtable for this, would have been behind the scenes, but these days it's probably held by Spanner. I can't confirm or deny that, but it is probably Spanner under the hood, because a lot of things got converted to Spanner when it was needed, because that would give you transactionality. That would give you, that when you acknowledge a message, they can mark it in the Spanner database. So that message has already been pulled. And when the message is pulled, they can kind of update and say, hey, this message is currently being pulled. Now, you could design it with Bigtable or other type database, even a JSON database. But, that's not an important part about understanding pub sub. But what is important is how do you deal with the messages? that are arriving because they're not coming into a single entry point and then processed by your Kafka cluster or your RabbitMQ cluster. They're actually coming in from all these different endpoints, and this is where the timestamp is the time accepted by the pub sub endpoint. And a message ID is assigned by the endpoint. And then it flows through the system. This is the dilemma of a globally distributed system versus a single point system. And most of you have probably, on-premise systems, everything flowed into one system, whether that be a mainframe if you work for a really large organization, or whether that be a cluster of machines, but in one place. Google is a distributed system. They want to accept that message at all their endpoints and then flow them through their internal network and systems into PubSub. That's why PubSub is a global service. And so that's kind of what's happening there. All right, so let's see how our message is doing here. So here's our message number 2. I'm going to go ahead and we got message 101 there. Let's ACK 101. So we'll go ahead and get an ACK in there. And we'll ACK 101, and then we'll see what we get. And then we'll talk about a push subscription really quick, and then we'll be done. Okay, so we just acknowledge that message. So now pull. Now, a more complex processor, let's say, if I just process one message, that's really easy. I could write a simple looping code in Node, Python, Java, whatever, pull a message, process the message, ACK the message, go get the next one. Pull the message, process the message, ACK it, go get the next one. And it's just a really simple loop because you're only dealing with one message at a time. But it's not going to be very efficient on the networking. Maybe you want to have more complex programming that says, I'm going to allow me to bring up to 10 messages in at a time. I'm going to put them in an array. I'm going to work with those messages in my array. Then I'm going to mark them all as done, and then I'll get another batch of 10. And so that's why, we can kind of say, well, how many messages you get at a time? There could also be a limit how much data you get at a time, because also, messages can actually be quite large in PubSub. And so you might want to say, hey, yeah, I could overwhelm my client machine. So the simplest is just round and round one message at a time. More complex would require more complex on your programming on your back end to go through and do that. But pull again here. And that's why they'll take a list of what messages have you processed. It might come back and tell me, hey, there's none there. Or it's checking the system and saying, are there any messages hanging out there that Grant wants? So PubSub is another one of those products. There's more and more things you can do with it. For the purpose of you're working on your cloud architecture exam, you just need to understand that PubSub is for getting messages from point A to point B, from, say, an application that's publishing a message, and then multiple subscribers getting that message. And see, there's none in the topic. I've talked now for 60 seconds, so we should get a bunch of messages. Yep, there they came. But notice 100, 101 isn't coming in. Okay, so what makes those? That's a pull, because I'm pulling the message. What's a push? So your push message is when you actually go over here and I say, I want to push the message, and what URL? So maybe I'm push it to apis.roitraining.com, and we'll call it app1. And so we push that. And so we're pushing the message. Or every time a message comes in, we're going to send it to that. Now, we could have on authentication. So maybe it says, well, what's the authentication to that? What service account do we want it to use? So maybe that's got to go. So the message is a push, the subscriber, and we want to send that to, say, our Cloud Function or Cloud Run or a VM or whatever. We could make it do authentication. And then there's, well, how long does the message stay there if it can't be delivered? Okay. And Google's got an option to retain acknowledged messages. So if you can have the system record those messages, but that increases your cost, because by default, PubSub's supposed to deliver your messages for you. And it's up to your next system to decide what it's going to keep and what it's going to log. PubSub's job is to deliver that message. But a lot of customers are used to things like Kafka and that having message replay capabilities, or the message way for it to save the messages that's delivered. And so Google says, well, we have an option for that, but it might cost you more money because keeping those messages around for longer than they're in transit once we delivered them, well, we're going to have to charge that back to you. So there's a charge back for keeping messages. So you could say automatically messages are retained in the message retention duration, and it increases your storage fees. So there's also filtering. There's exactly once delivery. There's dead lettering, so if a message can't be delivered. There's retry policies, because if I'm pushing to this URL, what if this website is down? Well, then it's going to keep trying. It's going to use a concept known as exponential backoff. So the first time it might deliver, and if it can't deliver, it might wait 1 second. And then it might wait 2 seconds, and it might wait 4 seconds, giving a chance for this server to come back online. And in fact, exponential backoff is a very common thing that we encounter when we're working with a cloud provider, and might actually be required for things like SLAs and things. But Google down here has a retry immediately. So if we try and it can't do it, try again. But they retry after an exponential backoff delay. And what's your minimum? So this one's a 10-second, and it 10, 20, 40, and keeps going out on an exponential up to literally 600 seconds, which is about 10 minutes. And so there's a ton of stuff you can do with PubSub. You could snapshot queues. So a snapshotting would basically say, I want to preserve what it looks like at, so I got 4 on my clock down there. So I'm going to snapshot exactly what's here at 4, and then I can replay that later. And so there's a lot of things. There was also a product called PubSub Lite. PubSub Lite was just strictly a regional product versus being a global service. I don't even know if PubSub Lite, I seem to recall that PubSub Lite might be going away. Yeah, there we go. PubSub Lite is deprecated. If you're using it, you need to stop using it by March 18th, 2026. It'll be turned down. So right now it remains functional for another year, just under a year. And they're going to start to sort of phase it out because it really didn't make sense. There's actually ways to limit the regular PubSub to a particular region by working with encryption. So those of you working at banks and other large organizations that have a lot or HIPAA type situations, so healthcare and things, you might have some strict requirements on where PubSub's allowed to operate. What you do is you deploy encryption keys so that the data can only be read in particular regions for things. So otherwise, it can't even pull the queue because it says I can't decrypt the data that's sitting in there. Okay, so that's PubSub. We'll be talking about that some more, maybe some future classes and things like that. But think about how you'd incorporate that into your application and how you might build that out. So hopefully you enjoyed this 40-minute video, and have a great rest of your day.